All right, what's going on, everyone? Preston Stewart and Sayer Payne with War Stories, joined again by John Spencer. John, thanks, man. Really appreciate you
Hey,
doing this.
hey, thanks, brother. It's great to be with both of you again. It just
So
feels natural, like coffee talk.
there we go. I like that. We the last time we chatted, we focused mostly on like urban warfare and kind of your focus at the Modern War Institute. And it was right when the war in Ukraine was kicking off. And I mean, holy cow, you've been heavily, we were talking about it right before we got started. I don't know the right word, heavily involved, heavily focused. Um, you've become a focal point of information for a lot of people in that conflict. It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, that's kind of scary, but uh, I since we talked, I traveled there, and that just reiterated my passion to understand what's going on. And it is geopolitical. It really applies to everybody in the United States. It applies to the world. So I spend a lot of time, and I have a dream job where I can trying to stay informed, not only on what's happening on the ground, because I get a lot of military questions, right? I get popular media asking me to explain what's happening, and that's a big passion of mine. It always has been, for us to explain military to non-military.
It's fun.
So
Yeah.
that's really hard. And
Yeah.
I listen to a space that's 24 hours, 7 days a week, which is Ukrainian, from Ukrainian fighters to Ukrainian citizens to experts in every field, just trying to stay informed on what's going on, because I think it is important. It's important to our generation.
Yeah, it does seem like the attention has lapsed a little bit here in the United States. I mean, it's not fair to compare it to the very beginning of the conflict because it was everything all the time, 24-hour news and all of that. But how do you view it in that sense of, the average Joe? Why is it important to
Yeah.
just the average American?
Yeah. So I agree with you. The for many, and this is the way that the news cycle works. It's
Sure.
ebbed and flowed in its place in the news cycle. Rightly so. I mean, every country has its issues. We have domestic issues that are very important. To answer why it's important to the United States, that's easy, and it is multifaceted, but it's easy as in uh, we are the leaders of the free world, literally the only superpower left. And it's not just our military that creates our power. It's the all four forms, like diplomatic, information, military, and economic. Um, we support freedom. We support democracies. We support the global international rules-based order. Now, people have said that in the news, like General Milley, the president, everybody, and even I had to explain that to some people, as in, what is that? Like, what is that global rules-based international order that allowed us after World War II to become a superpower, right? It's the backbone to the way nations will act to each other. It's the backbone of shared agreements. I mean, you're talking like trade agreements with enemies, with China, with Russia, with Iran. This global international order allows it all to work. And it allowed, if you just care about the United States, if you're some type of isolationist, which I don't believe in, right? That's not the way the world works. But if you were, our economic power is deeply wedded in this international order. And when a country like Russia decided that it would rewrite the rule book, right? So the post-World War II kind of rule book that is understood as kind of the creation of the United Nations, NATO, and all these things all fit into this puzzle. But Russia took a bold move, not just invading like they did in 2014, because they have nuclear power, they have nuclear arms. They decided that they would break all the rule books and go back to Hitler time and say, hey, I'm bigger, I'm badder, I'm going to take this country because I think it's mine. I don't think they should be able to exist. It's threatening my form of government, my ability to control my people. And the only reason that he was able to do that is because he has nuclear power. It's literally what the rule book says you can't do when a bigger nation invade a smaller nation to take away their sovereignty, which goes to before World War II. But just that act, if I knew nothing else, which is one of my favorite scenes in a movie called Knight's Tale, when the king knights this guy, if I knew nothing else, if I knew nothing else about geopolitics, when Russia decided that it would invade Ukraine to take it, like decapitate it, totally subjugate 40 million people, that should have caused everyone in the world to take pause. Because then I firmly believe he wouldn't have stopped at Ukraine. Look, Ukraine has had its issues just like we've had our issues. To say that Ukraine's government is corrupt, like, okay, let's peel that back. What political system doesn't have corruption in it? But they've struggled just like we did in their pursuit of freedom. And actually, Preston, when I went to Ukraine, look, I was there to study a battle. Right? I was studying the Battle of Kiev. But what I came back was just the eerie similarities to what they're going through that we went through to achieve our independence. To include, which if people are this misinformed, they just really got to go back to like, grade school civil education, that the only reason the United States exists is because a bigger power came to our aid, right? So if France had not stepped in during our fight for our independence, we wouldn't have had a chance. Like there would have been no Yorktown, there would have been, no United States. So it's just crazy looking into the eyes of these civilian Ukrainians that their story is more like Lexington Concord than it is anything that I've ever witnessed traveling the world. So hopefully that hits it. If you care about the United States remaining a superpower, us being involved in Ukraine, if you care about national security, right? So this is the stuff that I do, right? Read the national security strategy, national defense strategy, who has been listed as the 1 and 2 enemies, peer competitors of the United States for decades, even during GWAT. It is Russia and China.
Sure.
So if you believe in proxy war, Ukrainians are weakening Russia's ability to do this ever again. If I knew nothing else, Ukraine is willing to kill, to weaken our global enemy who threatens all of our ways of life. And all they've asked us to do is provide them supplies. So people that argue that our money could be spent better, right? I don't want billions of dollars spent in Ukraine. One, that's just misinformed on how the geopolitics works, how peer competition works. And it's also like, let's rack and stack where we spend our money. I mean, that return on investment is huge compared to some things. I don't want to go through our total spending plan of our government.
No,
but
not right now.
Yeah, no. And it gets pretty crazy.
But I understand where that sentiment comes from, because like when I drive to pick up my daughter from school today, I'm going to drive by 3 people that are homeless in my town. And it's difficult. It's complicated. And like, look, the military by itself does not do the perfect job spending all of its money. There's so much waste in the government at baseline. So I understand the sentiment of like, what are we doing there when there's problems here? I don't know that it's one or the other, right? Like, I don't know if the money didn't go to Ukraine, that all of a sudden the homeless problem in XYZ city is resolved. But I can understand how that hits in the day to day,
Absolutely. I mean, and we have huge domestic problems, but look, like the reason we are a superpower is because we are values based. And there's in school, I teach like these different constructs in which we view the world, right? So if you don't believe that we support freedom and people, then look at it as a selfish way. Like if we don't stop Russia in Ukraine, then our problems will only compound as it furthers itself. It's literally our chance to stop Hitler rising, right? He hasn't. So I've done that in social media, right? I've said that this is our generation's Hitler. Now, look, I know he hasn't killed the millions that he did, that Hitler did. But if you look at the rise of Hitler and Hitler's invasion of Poland and how long it took the United States to join that fight, this is our chance this is our turn to be on the right side or the wrong side of history. And this is the rise of Hitler. He would not stop at Ukraine. And there's no way you can take his writings or his statements and try to say this is just a border dispute, right? I also don't like the whataboutisms or the what if isms. Like this is like, let's have an objective conversation based on the facts on the ground.
I think I cut you off earlier, Sarah. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, what about the concern? You just said don't do the what about.
You know, right? That's okay.
That's all I have, though, hypotheticals.
No, go ahead.
Or I could say the concern of, you put it in interesting terms when you now call, say Hitler.
Yep.
But I'm just thinking the argument then of the case where it's the arms race scenario where one person acts and we just keep one-upping each other. And then it's like kindling sticks. At some point it become logs, and that might be the argument that's by us doing all of these actions, right, and activities, it's fueling the possibility for the nuke, or even for us to actually be boots on ground, which is like, people don't want that, of course, but it's the question of, is it worth it or not, and all those things. Because I definitely I don't have good situational awareness about it. I really don't. For what I read, for even with my background, it does be confusing.
Yeah, no, and it is. I mean, war is complex, right? The pursuit of political objectives. We're involved in the war, even if we weren't given money. This is a geopolitical situation. So the nuclear card we're in uncharted territory, because all of our mental frameworks before were with people who didn't have nuclear arms, that were aggressors like this. And then the whole conversation about, they're not a member of NATO. Had they just been a member of NATO, then the ambiguity or the lack of decision making would be done for us. And I don't believe in that. So NATO it's a defensive alliance. Nobody's attacking Russia. Nobody's asking the United States to support somebody attacking Russia, right? That's been very clear. This is about literally a bully trying to commit genocide. So that's the other aspect. You have to keep taking the data in, right? So if this was just a border dispute, then the horrors that we're seeing, that you can't, how do you ration away Bucha, and some of the things we've seen, babies being raped to death, the numbers of civilians with their hands tied behind their back. And look, then this gets into the whole whataboutisms of, what about Rwanda and all these other, yeah, right. But this is, again, these are uniformed military personnel of a sovereign state, Russia, who is rewriting the rules. So this, not only is he saying, look, I have a nuclear weapon, so I can enter this country and I can commit horrible war crimes. So as a military guy, this is where I actually get a little bit emotional, as seeing, look, ISIS did horrible things, and we all watched that. But there was an aspect to that was a non-state actor who is kind of outside the rule books. There was a little bit of that is a domestic inter problem. But this is a uniformed military who is a sitting member of the UN Security Council, which is supposedly supposed to prevent nuclear wars, who's committing genocide against its neighbor just because it can. And nobody can say anything about that. Nobody can. So if I knew just that, if I just knew about these horrors, that should cause us to strike pause. And then, like, if people want to go about the whataboutisms, right, then I can go to the fastest, easy mental model is the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and how much, Charlie Wilson's war, like how much do we give the Mujahideen arms to attack our enemy, the Soviet Union? This is proxy warfare, but I actually don't like that, because I'm a value-based guy. And this is where this happened before we talked, but where Tucker Carlson took a clip of mine after Bucha and then basically said, I don't understand as a military guy why I fought in Iraq, and that militaries are only used for defending their countries. That's weird. That's not what I learned in the military. Look, war is the pursuit of political objectives. It's the nation, defending the nation and the nation's interest. So does our nation, the United States, the only leader of the free world, have an interest in protecting democracies? Or let's scratch that one. Does the United States have an interest in maintaining the global rules-based international order, the thing that allows us as a society to keep our values thriving, to include with all of our problems, right? We have some pretty big problems. If that answer is about national interests, that's foreign policy. That's what we do. And the return on investment of what Russia has done. So now look, Finland and Sweden within months will be a part of NATO. Ukraine will be a new nation of a democracy. Like, look, when this war started, Ukraine had massive issues. They had just gone through basically a revolution, the Orange Revolution. I strongly believe that after this war, that they'll be one of our strongest partners in Europe to maintain the European Union, our strongest partner for a bunch of reasons.
There's something I want to go back to. You mentioned
Sure.
that I don't, and I might be asking outside your expertise, so feel free to preface with that. But some of these things that we've seen the Russian troops do on the ground, some of the atrocities, I feel like we didn't see that coming. Like Russia, this is not the Cold War where there were no Americans in Russia and we had no contact or anything. Like it's been relatively open information sharing. We've had, military liaisons there. There's been not a partnership, but kind of with Russia over the last 20 years, right? It's not a black box. Did we not see this coming? Like, I feel like it's the same. And we go into Iraq in 2003 and we find out that the British are raping children. We'd be like, where on earth did this come from? Did we miss it? Where did that come from?
Yeah. So this is where I've gotten, to include very good friends of mine who say, this is just what Russians do. We should have expected this. This is what Russians do. They did it and they've done some horrible things to Ukraine in the past. So there is a bit of that, but the fact that's why I think, again, this is our 1937, 1939 moment. Had we had the clear facts and like, I don't need anybody else to explain to me, I can send objective reporters into a war zone. And had we known what Hitler was doing to the Jewish people and collecting them up, and if the mass people would have known that more, would it have changed anything? I think you still have fence sitters, right? You still have fence sitters.
How does it impact me? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's always going to be the case. A lot of people just sit aside, do nothing, or like, and the worst of it, the Nazi thing where they're just following orders. And that's because they're just afraid of losing their job at the end of the day, like, or embarrassment or shame or jail, or whatever, death. But I think, well, what's your take on social media's impact? Because as compared to then and what propaganda was, which it's, there's always going to be propaganda. We were just talking to someone yesterday about this very long rant from an injured soldier named Pavel. And I don't know, it's like 170 pages and it sounds like it's pretty impactful, and where he's like ranting against the Russian government, and he did it from Russia. And I think he's since fled. But my thought about that is that would have been like an impossible thing with the Red Army for that to actually happen. I mean, they were standing these guys up as puppets and propping them around. And that's not necessarily the environment we're in today. So sort of, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I think there is like, so I'm a big believer in combat observers. It's something that we used to do really for a long time. I don't know when the exact day is that we stopped doing it, but we would put observers all around the world in the Japan-China war, you name it. What we're seeing in Ukraine is that today's world, information is more powerful than any weapon. I mean, it is the new bullets on the battlefield, both domestically and in war, right? So the three populations that old German talked about that I think are a great way to simplify, right? Everybody wants complex simplified for them, right? So I like that, and I don't mind that. That's why I'll quote these old dead dudes all day long, because it helps simplify stuff. So this dude named Clausewitz said that there's three parties to a war. There's the militaries fighting the war, and they should be held accountable, right? Like, look, Americans have done some bad things in war, but again, the global rules-based international system means that military better create an investigation, justice, not tell them to keep on doing it. But anyways, there's the military, there's the political realm and the politics who send the militaries to achieve those national interests, and then you have the populations. This new world that we're living in now, this where we all can watch these things. I knew about things, and that's why it's both a burden and it's taxing that I have access into Ukraine more than probably even our political leaders, because I've just built an information feeding network to where I knew about Bucha before it hit international news. I knew about things being found in Izum. I could watch the map unfolding about this new counteroffensive before it became news. But that's the power of that information. Where people like Russia or Iran or other countries work now very hard at not only deterring and competing with their outside environments, but they have to do that inside to control that information. And it's influencing all of us. And that's why, again, I hate in our society, right? If we're a part of that population, right? The population that decides whether we support people or support our forces, which are in like 168 countries of the world right now. If you're not informed, then you're wrong. If you're listening to one news source, you're wrong. But it has empowered, like the Russia dissent, like the mass protests we're seeing now, but through information, but then that incorporates disinformation. So I think, to answer your question, brother, it's the new bullets of modern war is information.
On that, I was gonna say, on that front, on the information side, I have this, let's see if I can articulate this. I feel like I'm gonna trip over it, but Russia should be a stronger military. They have all of the nuts and bolts to make historically a strong military. The population, the economy, the natural resources. We can even add in technology if there's a way to measure that. I mean, they've got intercontinental ballistic missiles, night vision, stealth fighters. Like, there's not very, we can debate how those line up with American technology, but there's not very many countries with those things. But they're not looking at all like what we thought. Any idea what we missed? Or are we still missing something? Like what happened there? Like blindsided.
Yeah. Brother, that's a long podcast about, and I think, look, I'm always about accountability, hold people accountable. Yeah. So even as I think most of us in the veteran community agree that we jacked up the Afghanistan withdrawal greatly, but people should be held accountable. Hold people accountable to our complete intelligence failure on Russia's capabilities and its status of its military. In that, I will say in Ukraine, there's some stuff, again, that, more of these old dead dudes that talk about, the human nature of war. Like, it's never going to be zeros and ones. It's never going to be robots against robots. It's never on paper the size of military and type of weapons that matters most. When you have a nation, look, none of us would ever have made it out of war had we entered an environment where every millions of civilians were also trying to kill us. Not just the military on the paper that our intelligence cell said that was in the environment.
Sure.
If thousands, it doesn't matter how bad we are. Nobody could have got that right. But I also agree, just like we do, war will either expose your weaknesses or allow you to reinforce your hubris. Even the American military has gotten this right. We use stories of Desert Storm, the drive to Baghdad, to then reinforce our own beliefs and our capabilities, when arguably the enemy gets a vote. And if the enemy sucks, then that either allows us to say that we're the best, or like in Ukraine, Russia didn't know what its weaknesses were until it, threw the first punch and engaged with a committed, motivated, even much smaller military. How did we get it wrong? I mean, that's a long list. How did Russia jack up its form of government and its military so bad? I mean, it took decades. And there's a little bit of corruption, right? Back to corruption. Everybody's got it.
Sure. Yeah.
But that was endemic within their military. But the way that they even changed their conscript system, which is mandatory service. I'm actually not against mandatory service. I'm a big believer in it, but they changed it, which then weakened their capabilities to rapidly mobilize, which is what we're seeing now. They had good units, good, formidable, airborne, hardcore, committed units. Of course, a lot of those are dead already. But they also fought, like, hopefully one of our strengths is that we're constantly adapting. As a matter of fact, as I studied our military design, like, even, don't get me started on Battle Drill 6, which should be adapted, right? Stop rushing into rooms. It's just going to get people killed. It's SWAT tactics that we needed during the GWAT period. Even the special communities don't do that anymore. But it's about adapting. In the Russian military purposely did not adapt to the modern way of wars, whether that was their force structure or even how they bring in new people and how they, their NCOs, their career enlisted, like all these changes that everybody around the world figures out is the better way, the more effective way, leads to, look, Russia's been weighed and it's been measured and it's come up wanting. And that's great for us. They're no longer even at the near peer level, right? They're at the, whatever it is below near peer, just competitors. I strongly believe any of our divisions would wipe the floor with them at this point, and they've lost that unknown for us
for a while, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. How do you recover from this? How do you recover from that many of your best soldiers, let alone your generals, because you rely on that officer-centric system? It takes. So I've gotten that question. How does Russia rebuild? Like, they got to have a come to Jesus moment on understanding, breaking that mold of hubris, right? We've lost a lot of first battles, right? There's even books called, the first 100 days, first battles. But we'll rapidly adjust, and we'll redesign everything. I mean, even Eisenhower, when he took over World War II, he fired like 200 generals. He just said, "You're not able to adapt. You're gone." And that's the power of adapting. Of course, Russia's throwing their diplomats out windows and stuff, but they're not going to adapt their entire military as an organization. Who knows how they rebuild?
I feel like that's the interesting conundrum. That is trying to explain and articulate military life, like especially in a combat scenario versus civilian life. Because in ways I feel like I was way more flexible and adaptive, like freedom in a rigid structure like the military, because of the broad discretion you're sort of given when you're really just out on a frontier, and then almost like a more rigidness to here, because I just felt that way just because the whole deployment to me felt like a constant every single day, because they're adapting too like quicker than we are, because they're more nimble. And we're constantly responding to that. Us, like, we were like still configured as an 80s anti-armor company, but then we were dismounted basically the whole time. And so that's like, and I wonder, in our regards, it's always taught, not always done, but the point, we're always taught bottom-up refinement. You're listening from the lowest level, and the great units are taking that advice and disseminating. It's this ebb and flow, up and down. And I wonder with an organization like someone like Putin, who has the people afraid to tell the truth, and they're always telling him it's good to go. Yeah, we're great. It's that hubris you're talking about. And just that, at the end of the day, it's like a lack of communication, literally, from the doers on the ground that are actually seeing what reality is. Because we know that's like the fog of war, and that's a totally different reality than the telephone game that as you go up. So I definitely think that sets us apart. And it was, just for me to be kind of awesome to kind of see it firsthand and be a part of it, to be honest, because it is, I've been out for 10 years and done sort of different jobs. It's still way different, and I can't even put a label on that sort of discretion and autonomy in a weird way when you're out there.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I try to explain to people that too, and why no matter how many Russian soldiers the Russians now throw at their problem, it isn't going to solve it, because they don't have that foundation of trust and autonomy at the lowest level, which allows people to do great things. That's why Ukrainians are winning with better weapons. But if they didn't have that foundation, that it's hard to put it in words. I agree with you. I agree with you about that autonomy, but which goes back to trust all the way down to the lowest, crazy low levels. That,
right.
I mean, that's the interesting part of the Putin regime, is that Putin's not a dictator; he's an autocrat. So that means everybody around him only get their power through him, which creates this self-fulfilling prophecy where you can't tell the king he doesn't have any clothes. And you and I, all of us in the military, have probably at some point told our superiors, like, look, dude, that's not right.
Right.
And that's just not possible in the Russian system. And there's culture plays into this, right? So, American culture feeds into the military, which
absolutely,
it's a beautiful thing, but the Russian culture has some, let's say, weaknesses as well.
I used to play a lot of fantasy football, and you get towards the end on Sunday, and it's like, here is the scenario that needs to play out perfectly for me to win and beat my opponent. Like the quarterback can only pass to this guy, not that guy. Like, anyways, the further this war goes on, the more I feel like that. Like, I don't know, there's no longer in my mind like a very obvious end to this conflict. That is just I'll take option A. Like,
right.
What's the perfect John Spencer solution here? What in a perfect world, how does it wrap up?
Oh yeah. So I think so this is right. If you ever listen to me on the news, and there's a couple quacks that they talk to all the time who can predict the end of this, they're just wrong.
They have been for months.
Yeah. And I think we should weigh me, take every comment I've ever made. Make sure if I need to eat crow, I will. And if I need to say I totally got that wrong. But if a dude who has already gotten generals, American generals, you don't get me started, who can say they can predict the end. These are also the same. Like our current general said this would be over in 72 hours to a week. Look, hold people accountable. So here's my prediction based on watching this every day after going there and walking the ground, looking some of these military officers, civilians in the eyes, is that I think we've already seen the end of this, that Russia has culminated its military, right? We know that there is math to military capability, and just adding soldiers to it doesn't increase your effectiveness. It'll just get more people killed. And the Ukrainians are growing every day. They have our intelligence, let alone the arms. They're building units as we talk. So they're shipping them off to Ukraine as units. They're coming back into theater as a cohesive team with all these principles, these Western principles of autonomy and trust. And hey, just go get it done. I don't know if you watched this latest offensive, but I mean, their offensives included a mechanized brigade-ish, but also was followed up with dudes driving around in Humvees, MRAPs, pickup trucks, just getting it done.
That's where all the equipment's at. I didn't know where it was. I thought I thought they were just plugging it in gaps in the line, but no, they were holding it all in. Anyways, yeah. Crazy.
So I think they're getting stronger every day. Russia's getting weaker every day. And look at they're starting to fracture even domestic politically, right, with the protests and everything. So I think this war will end in its current form in months, just like we watched the war for Ukraine end back in April when they totally withdrew. What we're seeing lately is that when they're defeated, they don't even have the capability to withdraw anymore. They just run. Because what they did in April, they were still a cohesive military force, and they were able to do a very deliberate withdrawal out of all the areas and reformed and made a big push. They don't have that capability anymore. They're culminating at so many levels. So I think that Ukraine will continue to push through the winter, and they won't give Russians any respite in the winter. And things might slow down because you and I know how soldiers work, but the end of this is a complete withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine sovereign land. So Ukraine has successfully defended its ground. Look, people say that's not possible. Russia needs to save face, blah, blah, blah. Again, I'm not a Russia expert. I'm not a Putin expert. I know he can do and say whatever he wants, and it doesn't matter if it's complete fantasy football or not. I won. We have achieved our objectives, and now we're we're going to rebuild our military, whatever. He could do that tomorrow. I strongly disagree, and then hold me accountable to this. This war does not go on for years the way it currently is. Look, will there always be Putin or somebody else in Russia who has mad dreams of recreating the Soviet empire? Yes. Will they threaten their neighbors? Of course. And good luck trying to threaten Finland, who's now a member of NATO, and just increased your border by like twofold with NATO countries. But Ukraine comes out of this. They're going to have to reorganize themselves because they're using just anybody's and everybody's equipment that they have. Yeah, it's crazy, but doing such amazing things that I don't even know if we could do. Like here's 10 different systems and some highly motivated soldiers. Get her done, but they are. But this ends at some point with that Ukrainian force postured all along its borders, with Russia on the other side licking its wounds, and having to really look in the mirror and do a strong reassessment of their political system and especially their military. How do you, like you said, this will take decades and decades for Russia to rebuild a system, especially without the same type of context that like Germany, Japan, in that new world order that was created that allowed them to create a new way of life, a new national identity, all these things.
It's probably something that, my point is, it's probably something that doesn't get talked as much as it should, is the fact that, we talk about July 4th and Declaration of Independence and Constitution, all that. But like, what does it mean? I think contextually, like and there were obviously the whole slavery thing and there was lots of bull crap involved, but ultimately though, it was the Constitution and there was no other one like that in the world at that time. And what it means to me anyway, is that the inherent point of that document is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who your dad is, just who you are, because all the other governments were straight up led by the lords and the nobility and the monarchies and things like that. And even though it still matters who your dad is, of course, that's life, it's politics, it's what it is. But from a legal structuring system, that's what we're going to say. And that is regardless of religion and all those, and ethnicity, all those different things. And then to think how many in the world are now under governing those similar rules under a constitution that they used ours from. We sort of bear the burden of it being the oldest document. And so, when you're in Germany in 1946, because that's how Germany, as we know it, that's how old they are. They're not hundreds of years old. They're from like 1946. They're a constitution. Well, they could write into the document itself, let's say our Supreme Court jurisprudence and precedents. And so they're constantly building upon this, and to think what like Ukraine's will become, they're the newest iteration of this. And while like you're talking about they're doing things that we can't do, I would think so, because it does sound like the revolution in a sense, and they are more nimble, where we do have more rules, right? We're farther on the timeline than where they are. And we are probably at the end of the day, probably more redcoat like with our rules and regulations that have been inherent to our culture for hundreds of years and generations now, whereas they're still fledgling. Even if you considered, just in the early 90s when they came to being, I guess, as a nation, even obviously the people have been there for a very long time.
Yeah, 100%. And we're still we're the greatest democratic experiment in history, right? So we're still evolving our system, and we get knocked down, we make mistakes, you get back up. But if it's centered on that Constitution and those values that we all agree are what it means to be an American, right? Individual rights, freedom of religion, freedom of the speech, freedom, all these freedoms that are at the heart of being an American citizen. And once we establish ourselves as a global leader, then we have to lead. And that means it's just a fact that we are stronger supporting others in the pursuit of this experiment.
With a lot of the weapons heading overseas, there's always these arguments, right? Offensive versus defensive. I don't remember weapons being labeled like that, but I guess that's the thing.
Yeah,
what
right.
from the get-go with any of these, especially here, my concern has always been, at what point does Russia view that as the United States becoming a legitimate target, or whatever, or Poland or NATO?
Yeah.
In your mind, is there any line there with the weapon systems, or
No.
is that because, why?
It's just ridiculous political talk. So proxy war is just as old as warfare, right? Right. So the rules that are outlined and what it is to support another country doing its thing, whether we pick the right side or not, it's pretty set in stone. If that's a normal function of a sovereign nation, is to support anybody they want, but with indirectly, with arms, money, technologies, all of that. Look at what Iran and other people were doing to us in Iraq, right? I got blown up by a lot of stuff that only came from Iran.
Sure.
Yeah.
An enemy of my enemy is a friend of mine.
That's absolutely. I mean, it's the way the world works. Now, what we have allowed Putin to do, and look, this is our system. We built this system of, it isn't the president making these decisions on what weapons to give or not, right? We know how the National Security Council, the chairman of joint, it is a cohesive body, right? Like, look, just people understand who sits on the National Security Council, right? So it's the State Department, it's the Treasury Department, it's the military, and we make a collective decision with risk calculus on, like, if we give them this, can the other nation state in this proxy war, Russia, would that allow them to escalate beyond the current rule books of what's being allowed, even though just the fact that Putin's using war crimes as a method of warfare should be enough to change the rule book, but it's not. So this ideal that we could give them a weapon, like right now, it's not just the ATACMS, which is a round that, like the rounds of the multiple launch rocket system, that just goes a lot farther. That Putin publicly said that would be an escalation of the kind, like, and I think it's appeasement to allow him to say, like, look, dude, look, bully, like, we know what the rules that you're playing by are the same rules that keep us from intervening. So to say that any weapon we give that's just ridiculous. But the National Security Council, because there are camps that sit farther left or farther right of the support we should be given, what type of support, says that that could be used to attack Russia. There's only one aggressor. There's only one person in another person's sovereign nation at this moment. But I could, and I know that I could be sitting in locations right now in Ukraine, and I could fire a mortar and hit Russia.
Yeah. Throw a grenade across the border in some places.
That's right. It has nothing to do with it.
Sure.
I personally think that those systems, you could argue that, we want to weaken Russia. We don't want to break Russia. So there's a lot of calculus on what we give and when we get it. Of course, there's the sustainability part, right? Like, you can't give them some technology, but some of these weapons, that's not the issue. It literally is, we're making a calculated political risk decision. Would this allow Putin to escalate it to what? I don't know what else. Right. There's the nuclear card. And you haven't asked me that, so I'll just offer that free statement out there.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Right. Nobody can predict that. Right. So there's elements of the triggering event and the underlying cause of warfare that we teach at West Point. Like, we can usually identify a trigger, but not the root cause of a lot of things. Can I say for sure that Putin wouldn't use nuclear, biological, chemicals in war? There's been others that have, right? So Saddam used chemical weapons on his people, and we sat by, and even though we told the Kurds that we wouldn't, we sat by and said, risk calculation here. I think in the context of this war, and being the fact that this nation state, Russia, is trying to rewrite the global international order, and us and 50 other nations, we just happen to be the leaders of this 50 plus nations of democracy, saying no. If he uses nuclear, biological, chemical war, it would end his regime and his current status as a federation. And this is what we teach. And also, look, There is a probability analysis that you can do, but I usually try to simplify it. Every leader in every country's number one national interest, just like ours, is survival. So that plays into their calculus of what they will and won't do. And Putin knows he's not, I don't consider him an irrational actor. I know he's evil and he has evil intentions, but he's rational. Like he wouldn't have survived for this long. He's not.
Yeah.
I think he personally knows, and we have to signal, and we have, if you use nuclear biochemical, it completely changes the status of this war, and what the United States and many, many other nations, and I would venture to say a whole lot more than 50, would then change the rule books on what we could do. It's not mutually assured destruction, because that still does apply, right? So if it's not going to launch one at the United States for providing attack on us, because that would clearly turn.
Whoa.
Yeah.
A few steps there.
Yeah, but that people go there, like, right? So we're causing World War III to happen. No, we're preventing World War III from happening.
Well, he sounds to me like, doesn't he sound worse than Hitler then, with his rationality? Because if Hitler was like, took everything personal, let's say, and the maniacal desire to eliminate an entire like race of people and religion, if he was just a Napoleon character, he would have been a lot more dangerous, I would imagine. And so just kind of resentful of whatever others, and just wanting to conquer land and using more ration and logic.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
Over, you got the issues, the bully issues, of course, which is all they all have them.
Yep. And there's lots of bad people in the world, but why this one? Hopefully I've made an argument on, because it matters to our way of life, and what we thrive under. If you don't understand that, you just get informed about how the world works. I agree with you. He's worse than Hitler. One, because he doesn't have that rationale of, he doesn't have Stalin's army. He doesn't have Stalin's society. So he can't even do the bad things that Stalin did without repercussions. Plus, that was all before the age of nuclear warfare. So he's playing a card of nuclear deterrence and nuclear terrorism. He's a terrorist, to do evil things just in the, but this is the appeasement. I'm just going to do this in Ukraine, right? Look away. I just want to do this to Ukraine, and then this all ends, right? That's what people want. Like, we shouldn't be involved in Ukraine. This is a border dispute. Like, how ridiculous is that? Like, just look away. I'm going to rape babies to death. I'm going to cut off people's genitalia. I'm going to just look away, and it'll just happen in Ukraine. And I'll bring these 40 million people into order, and we'll all be friends again. Like, that is just uninformed people that I feel sorry for, that if you think that he would stop at Ukraine.
So do you think we live in an era where the borders that exist, they are now sort of, everybody needs to agree that they're set in place, and they were drawn in the past for whatever reason, and whether it was fair or unfair, that's been a while by now. And it was a complicated hundreds of years of sort of, the first stage of globalization was, I guess, everybody's recognition of borders, for one. And now are we at the stage where we pretty much, they're sort of set in stone, and now we're in the phase of, we now within those borders and outside of them have to learn how to get along, because sort of the Civil War stuff and that sort of violence we're trying to progress out of as we can, the world continues to develop down this chain of events.
Sure. I think it's a great question. And, I'll give my opinion. I'm by far an international relations expert. I'm a one-trick pony with urban warfare, who just happens to also be a student of war. There are all kinds of contested borders around the world, frozen conflicts. I went into Nagorno-Karabakh in 2021, and it's yeah. Oh yeah. Don't get me started on that story. I mean, how am I going to study, say the things I do if I don't go the places I'm talking about?
Well, this is why I want to hear your opinion on it.
Yeah.
So definitely carries some weight here.
And I got a lot of flack, and I don't know if I can agree with what's happening right now, but I went into Nagorno-Karabakh, if people don't know, is a very large piece of land in between Azerbaijan and Armenia, that they've been fighting over for decades and decades and decades. I got invited because I wanted to go see an urban battle that ended the war in 2020. I traveled inside there through minefields, all this, to the city to study the battle. But by just going there, I got a lot of hate mail, which you guys know I'm used to, about from one side, because it is a frozen, disputed area.
Mm.
What I'll say about this, no, I absolutely don't think that all borders are set in stone and we should all disagree with that. But there is a process, a rational process, which either contests them. Think about Kashmir, think about that are hot zones and are triggers for national identity and huge China and Nepal, like there's just lots of places around the world. And that's why Ukraine in 2014 disputing Crimea, disputing Eastern Donbass was a lot different than a nuclear power invading the second largest country in Europe to overthrow the entire government. So that automatically makes the contested border area, like where we draw lines, because there was a lot in 1918 when some lines were, redrawn that aren't right. They just literally were people like us, like, oh, that looks good. Let's just draw that Duran line through the mountains, or oh, that river is nice for the map.
That'll work.
That if you haven't studied that, that's just an amazing human history about the meetings of the world leaders to draw new lines on maps, which have been the wars that we've been fighting ever since. Over.
Yeah.
So absolutely not. But I think there's a democratic, rational, global, rules-based international order to address those elements, right? And I think Israel and there have been some great wins, although there's still some very wicked problems in borders in Israel with like Gaza. In that, again, it's not my expertise, but clearly what Russia did as a nuclear power to overthrow an entire government because he just doesn't think they should exist, written on paper, said aloud, just doesn't think, is the never again that we said as a world we would never allow. But yeah, absolutely, there are contested borders all around the world.
And what I mean to be clear, it's like, I think that list was probably, well, first it was undefined. There were no such thing as nation states, right? But we've continued to develop. And what I think is that list was bigger with those border disputes. And
absolutely
getting towards the point where there, like obviously the China-Taiwan thing, who the heck knows? But I feel like the point in the future is the next step is to get to that level of agreement where these borders are the borders, and we can only hope that those disputes get settled via the written documents.
Correct. And
versus war.
And democratic processes. I mean, let them vote. Like, so this is the sham of Ukraine, right? The whole thing, like, okay, these countries are going to vote to be Russian, or these areas, these provinces, that one, like the rules actually say you can't have a contested area and then have a vote, like where there's active conflict happening. But that's the sham. Again, Russia trying to rewrite the rules. I'm going to really quickly have a vote of all four of these. I'm going to stake a flag in it, call it Russia, and then claim, again, vital national interests, protecting sovereign land because the people voted to be Russian. If you really like, hey, that's actually the path. But you you send third party actors in to hold legitimate democratic elections. And if that was happening, and then this huge swaths of the border areas were saying, I identify with Russia, I want this to be Russian. Hey, it would be really hard for us to say that that's not right.
Yeah.
But when you hold elections where 10% of you're still killing people in this area, and you're like, hey, come here, come vote real quick, vote to be Russian, and then I can stick a flag in here and say, if you touch this land, I'm going to nuke you. That's the ridiculous aspect that we can't allow to happen.
And I just saw, I don't even remember the source. I would not cite this as fact quite yet, but the preliminary results from some of those referendums are like between 96 and 98% vote, yes, we want to join Russia. Like, it's not even close. Overwhelming.
Well, and even if they genuinely wanted to John's point at the very beginning, he already said information is more powerful than bullets. So that genuine desire to flip the switch, yes, could be completely misinformed and sort of brainwashed in a way based off of the information they're receiving. And that's why they're flipping the vote. And that goes to your democracy point. Because not just the, I guess, written document, it needs to be a meeting of the minds, essentially, right? Informed consumer, let's say.
Yeah. And this goes back, I honestly, and I don't speak for any veteran. Why did I served in the military for 25 years. Of course, it was a job. It's a dream job. I think it really peeled back that onion because I felt strongly, even in Iraq, that I was there to protect freedoms. Like, hey, you want to vote for whatever government you want? I'm 100% supportive of that. If you want to subjugate, look, I'm here, but something deep inside of me, because of the way I was raised, is that I joined the military to be a part of something bigger, to serve my nation, which that nation is, believes in freedom, democracy, all these things. So me personally, John Spencer, why did I fight in wars with very complex national pursuit objectives? Why it was started, why it was kept going, was because I felt like that's a part of who I was, is that I protect the innocent, I protect freedoms, and I kill shitheads. I kill evil people trying to do evil things to other people. That's what I was trained to do. And to say that every soldier in the U.S. military only defends the United States, like that's so uninformed, so ridiculous.
I like that. It sounds a lot like what you're doing right now, honestly. I mean, there's people in this country, and your neighbors, probably some of your friends, that will agree and disagree with what you're saying about Ukraine. But at the end of the day, you're providing that information for people to be able to at least understand it and make a more informed decision. None of us are going to have the perfect picture, but you're helping people cut through that, which I think is awesome.
I hope so.
And
the issue is our elected leaders. Are our elected leaders making that decision, doing the right thing? Like, look, I've been a Republican my entire life, and I disagree with some elements of the Republican Party just because I think they're not informed. Like, look, I believe in women's rights, Second Amendment, all these things, but I also believe in people that we elect to lead us to be informed, just to know, to take the briefings that I don't even get, and make not a party-based decision, but make a personal, informed decision, because that's why we elected you to lead us.
That's hard to argue against.
Yeah, amen to that.
Do you have another book coming out, John?
Oh man, thanks you, brother. Yeah, I actually do. So, the book Connected Soldiers came out after we talked last time, July 1st, and just been blessed with the response to it, and the people that blurbed it. How these really important people will say it's a great thing. But in a couple of weeks, my other book called Understanding Urban Warfare, interestingly, comes out. It'll be on Amazon, all of that, and that's literally the name of it, which it looks at. I think we have two big problems in my world: understanding urban areas, like the city itself, and then understanding how to fight in cities, to include looking back at our own mistakes in battles where we didn't get it right exactly, but we should definitely be learning from these urban battles, and then adapting, like we were talking about, our
adaptability.
Approach.
That's what I was thinking.
But you only look. So I'm a big believer in adaptability, but don't ever let, especially a military leader, saying that's what we're doing when without information, if you're just guessing, right? You're just changing. Adapting is getting some new information and then adapting yourself towards that information. We sometimes call guessing adapting. Like if I'm just, that's the element of why I'm so passionate about urban warfare. Is like I'm just learning every day, and that adapts the way I think about it, the what I recommend to militaries to do about it. Look, because even coming out of the global war on terrorism, coming out of counterinsurgencies and counterterrorism, against a pure competition, we have to be adapting. If we're not changing a lot based on what we're seeing in Ukraine, in the U.S. military, then we're just wrong. We're not adapting.
My 2 cents on that too is you got to do the little things right before you can even think about that either. You know what I mean? It's like, because when you were talking, you're making me think of the battle drills. It's like having just that sort of, you're not even thinking, you're just doing. You've done it so many times and rehearsed the scenarios, and then that's when the flow happens, where the adaptability kicks in. But you've got like it's that crawl, walk, run stuff. And I think that's sort of a uniqueness of the military. So it's that, and that goes back to free speech and all this stuff that, hey, look, you're a veteran yourself. You did the job. That's what we appreciate about you. You're someone who walks the walk. The pundits are all talkers, and that's what's frustrating. Most politicians are talkers. You're someone who actually does what you say. It's a rarity. So it's nice to have you on, just to be able to talk to you and pick your brain, because that's the most valued opinion to someone like me, at least. But ultimately, big picture, you're someone who served in the military yourself, who made a career of it, but you can go out on the free net and explain the things that are good, the things that are bad. Preston's still in the DOD, you know? I mean, there's no elephant in the room about that. He is too. And like, here we are able to have these conversations and people listen to this. There are blogs out there, you know, I read them as a platoon leader and things like that. And that helps. Well, House to House was written. I remember reading that in IOBC, I was getting ready, you know, and that's a firsthand account of someone who did the job. And I'm sure it goes through some screening, but for the most part, we've got he was, I think, still in the military. You're out of it. So that whole free speech thing, that's how we're adaptable. I mean, that ends up being the result, I guess. The why and the how is because that free speech component, which I just think it's so powerful for this disinformation, these issues that you're saying that are more dangerous than bullets. It's the free speech. To me, that's the umbrella that we're all under. That is what's protecting us ultimately from these future problems that can happen.
I think that this is the aspect that you guys inspire me. Look, I put it in my book, Connected Soldier, talking about my platoon leader time. I didn't, as a member of a profession, do the kind of broader mental improvements, right? So we go to PT every morning, we improve our body. I read doctrine, but this aspect of in the profession of understanding war and warfare is not a nice to do. It's literally a responsibility. And then as a citizen now, I'm like everybody else. I'm a citizen of the United States. It is a responsibility of every citizen to understand what the heck they have such a strong opinion about through learning, right? And that's why I spend a lot of time now every day learning about what's going around. And I guarantee when I was, you would have approached me at 20, 25, like I couldn't have told you anything about like the geopolitical aspects of the National Security Council decisions about Iraq and all the reasons that led up to why we were there. I had no clue. It's a responsibility as a member of this great nation to learn about this stuff.
I love it. You're helping a lot of people, John. Appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on.
You guys are. Look at this. You guys are. My podcast is becoming more infrequent just because of whatever reasons, but you guys are doing the thing too.
Well, keep up the good work, man. Always good catching up. And we'll talk soon.
Totally. Yeah. Appreciate it, John.
Thanks, brother.